out in the new guidance document. I want to talk about one of the most straightforward changes first. And this is at the very end of the PDP, our plan development process. So the current requirement is to submit some non-contractual for information only deliverables at the time of bidding in the letting process. And that is continuing and expanding. So this slide here is just showing you what type of digital data, what our current requirement is, and what that future requirement will be when our new guidance document comes out, which we're targeting April this year for. So no changes to the surfaces. That's in the XML format. Alignments format, we are proposing a change from a text or HTML to an XML format. Anybody want to guess why we made that change in format? Contractors, I heard. That's the answer. The DGN files for information only, those are helpful to contractors, so we're going to start providing them also. The new thing that we're going to start providing is some 3D elements, a package of 3D elements that the contractor can use to build their model in DXF format. I'm just going to show you a little bit about what that work looks like. The first one is an urban example. And there's a list of maybe 5 to 7 chains that are valuable for contractors to build their models. You know, they loved us giving them their final finished surface, which is our current requirement. But they said, you know, what's even better is if you could give us this handful of 3D elements that you use to build your model, we will use those to build our model and find that a much more efficient way to do so. And here's another example of these same requirements that you might see on a rural type project. Same concepts, just a little bit of a different look to these things. And why did we choose these specific 7 items? Contractors wanted them. Okay, so I hope you start to hear this obvious theme here that I'll be repeating. Because we are in 3D modeling, and as we're going to talk about digital delivery later, we are always thinking about our downstream customer and giving our data to them in the format that's useful and expecting it back from them likewise. All right, so that is the end of the PDP, the most straightforward change we made, which is the final plans deliverable, as I mentioned. And another major change in our guidance document was to introduce this idea of organizing it in the PDP framework. Again, right now, the only requirement is at the very end. But our new document is going to set it up in terms of all these record plan sets, as we call them at GDOT, even if there's no specific requirement for them now. Because as you're probably imagining, in the future, there very likely will be. So as we thought about this, we came up with these 3 basic requirements. It's either not required at all, it is required, the 2 obvious ones, or kind of the in-between one where it's encouraged for submission if beneficial, but still not required. So here's how we've divided that up for this upcoming version of the guidance document. No requirements for all the deliverables you're seeing in concept phase, plans to other offices, public meetings, right-of-way plans locked down and corrected. The encouraged, if beneficial, we're currently putting on A3M, which is our avoidance and minimization measures meeting, a very important meeting to delivery in the preliminary design phase, where engineers and environmental specialists are understanding the constraints of their design. So in that meeting and the possibly more familiar or longer standing constructability review meeting, these stuck out as kind of a mid-level coordination meeting where we could easily see a benefit to a designer showing a 3D model to other engineers and non-engineers. And to save the last, the biggest change for last, what's required. So no change to final submission to CBA, but in my opinion, the biggest change to the guidance document overall is that GDOT will be requiring 3D model submittals at our 2 major, interdisciplinary plan review meetings, the PFPR and FFPR, and every type of those also, IFPR, supplementals of both cases. So this is the first time, it's fair to say, that someone other than you or your reviewer is going to actually be looking at your model. And I'm going to turn it over to Chase at this point and Josh to go into a lot more detail on some of these items.
All right. So as Sam mentioned earlier, we've been spending the last 2 years trying to work our way to push the level of detail that we're going to have in these 3D models that we're now going to be reviewing and having components submitted at final plans. So the culmination of that 2 years of work is going to be a package of documents that you're going to see roll out over the next couple months from GDOT that are going to live on the ORD page and GDOT's website, that are going to basically be workflow documents to help you do all these things that we're mentioning. So the first one I want to highlight is what Sam was mentioning earlier, a workflow document that's going to go specifically into the 3D construction deliverables, these XML and DXF files that we're now requiring. So this is just a nice little composite, and really the crucial thing in developing these workflows in collaboration with both GDOT's design policy support staff, consultant community who is helping review and work test some of this, as well as the Georgia Highway Contractors Association that gave feedback on the deliverables. We wanted to make a process that is very streamlined, easy to follow, and it's not going to take a lot of time for the designers to implement. So just as an example, you see right here, we have the, creating the alignments using the Land XML process, which is essentially loading up, going through this ribbon that GDOT now has, the GDOT Construction Deliverable ribbon, applying the Land XML format, selecting your item, and then it'll output into a Land XML. And what you should see and what you should be doing is testing, bringing that software back into the Bentley workspace, and hopefully you see everything that you've designed come back in and it's nice and clean. That's what we want to make sure the contractors are seeing on their end. Separately, we want to focus on these polylines, right? So when you submit these documents, what we're hoping you see is this basically finished pavement surface, but everybody produces now as part of your Land XML, a 3D brake line, which again, it's all the brake lines along your project. And then those polylines, and as Sam mentioned, we collaborated with the contractors. We made sure that we got the most important components of that highlighted in the templates and the workflow. And so, yeah, edge of pavement, back of curves, walls, ditches, limits of construction, all these great things. That's what we want to pass on. Again, the purpose of this is to create models that the contractor's not just going to take when they win the contract and they're going to throw in the trash. That's what they're doing right now. So we want to give them something that they can use and that's going to expedite their time in construction, right? So separate document, and it's going to live on the ORD page under the ORD design workflow processes. So there's a couple chapters, if anybody's familiar with this document, that help you work through. I think there's some right-of-way table creation, things like that. We're going to create a new chapter that is going to go into how to generate a DGN file that will contain all your corridor and your 3D model and be in a format that GDOT can review, right? So show you. So this is, again, a very quick process. I want to be very cognizant of folks' time and how, what needs to be done to generate this. We're not trying to create a bunch of extra work that you're not already doing when you're developing your 3D models, but basically just taking what you created, what you're showing in your plans, and what you're seeing in your model working at your company or internally at GDOT, and putting that in a format that's going to be nice and easy for the reviewers at GDOT who have never reviewed 3D models before, right? So we want to put it in a nice, easy to review format and begin building up the engineering services, construction, district construction, all those folks' skill sets in reviewing the models, and ultimately with the goal of making the models better. So within this workflow document, we're going to have just some a breakdown of creating your, final contours, which I'm sure a lot of you know how to do, but it's going to be explicitly written into a document that GDOT has. And then creating, clip contours as well, so that the model review file looks really nice and clean. This is a great example. So we want to make sure that we clip out our 3D model at the edge of your limits of construction, so that when you then overlay that with your, it's called the FCON here, we're seeing our nice clean contour lines that are being developed along here. And then we're going to overlay on top of that your 3D model. So as a reviewer looks at this, they're going to be able to see, all right, here's where, at this, point, we're looking at what the elevation is. It's nice and clean. We're rotating it around. Making it a little bit better or very easy for someone to understand who's looking at this for the first time. And in this new workflow, we're going to have, a couple things here. This is more just for your information. We'll be creating a new file that will be deliverable in your DGN package. So it's going to be the model review DGN that you'll name after whatever milestone you're working on. And then the reference files you see up there on the screen, those are the types of files that we'd like to see in that model review document. That's what we want those reviewers to be looking at. And let's see. And also to aid in the process of creating this in that workflow document, we'll have a little micro EDG here that will go through all the levels that we'd expect to see, because the ultimate goal, again, for these engineering services folks, construction folks at the GDOT level, we want them to see a consistent model product that's coming from the designer. So we like for different firms to all generally submit their files in a similar format. In addition to the levels, we'll actually state what the view attribute is that we like for like colors and things like that to look like, just again to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page with the look and feel of that file. And I want to highlight this model review right now it's supplemental to the plan review, right? We want, again, the ultimate goal is we want better models from our consultants in Georgia, and we want, GDOT to be reviewing those models, making comments, with the ultimate goal of developing better models that then we can pass on to the contractors and they can build off of those models. That is the ultimate goal. So as I say all this, I want to just continue to highlight that this is supplemental information to your plans, but in the FFPR meeting or PFPR meeting, have somebody on your team ready to go with the model. And if, there are some comments from GDOT about what they're seeing, have somebody that's available that can manipulate and go in and make sure things are looking good, right? That's the goal with this one. So an additional document that'll come out is the model review checklist. And Josh is going to go into a little bit more specifics of looking at all these individual line items. But I want to highlight that this checklist is really meant for the designers. What should you be considering during design? Maybe you're not considering doing wraparounds at retaining walls right now when you develop your model. That's typically in construction a big comment you receive from contractors. It's how is the interaction of this? You've got a retaining wall and then your slopes to start. We have to wrap that around, right? It's just making sure that you're considering a few of these ideas when you're doing design. And again, as we're working through kind of baby steps here, we want to look at the big picture things. When GDOT's reviewing these models, they're going to be looking at kind of very obvious errors in the model. So that would be any spikes that you may have in the terrain. Do you have components that are flying down to the zero elevation and it's way down here and everything else is up here? Do you have gaps in your model, right? As they kind of rotate around, look at it, kind of zoom in, move it around, all this fun stuff. is there anywhere where there's no information, right? That's, or information that we're looking at the plans and we see one thing, your model does not have it. Those are the big picture type of things that we're going to expect, to be the majority of the comments that you're going to possibly receive from GDOT when they review this model. Again, just going into a little bit of extra about some of the things that are on this list. Josh is going to go over this momentarily. More specifically, again, as I mentioned, grading walls and wraparounds, that's something. Doing permanent pond detailing. I know some folks do that, some folks don't. Just making sure you're considering that and having that as part of your service or merging that into your final land XML service. Want to make sure that anything that's final proposed condition, we're seeing that. We're giving that to the contractors so they have that to use. And then the last piece of the model checklist will just be kind of what we've mentioned before, the types of files that we'd be expecting to see at the various milestone reviews. So again, the composite 3D DGNs, and then all of these land XMLs and DXF formats, we're not going to require you to produce any of that until the very end, kind of similar to how you're developing your 3D model, 3D deliverables currently. So with that, I'm going to let Josh go into a little bit more detail about the specific components. And right before I do, so we've talked about the this checklist. We've talked about this 3D deliverable document. We've talked about an update to the ORD workflow that's going to tell you how to assemble this model review. We'll have a slight update to the PPG just to kind of point you in the direction of these documents. And then we're not covering it today, but Josh has done a great job of developing a 3D design guideline that is going to also live on GDOT's website. And that document, less so about ORD, more so about GDOT's specific policy when it comes to 3D design. So just wanted to highlight that before I handed it over, because that will also be in kind of the package of files that you're going to see in the next couple of months. So with that, I'll let Josh go into a little bit more detail on the individual components you should be looking at when you're reviewing your model.
Thanks so much, Chase. I appreciate it. One thing that I did want to mention on the checklist before we go on is that you can see it says required at PFPR, FFPR. The PFPR requirements are going to be things that impact the right-of-way, just as it is now. And then the FFPR is when you're going to finalize all that grading around intersections and within the roadway area. So that's sort of how we're breaking apart what needs to be done early, what needs to be done later. So I'm going to talk about the agency's model review. This is what GDOT's going to do when they get your model. And they're actually going to use a software called Bentley View. So this is something that can be, gotten for free, can be done very, very simply. And I'm showing an example here of somebody, rotating through, zooming in, looking at a model, looking for potential errors. And this review is what's going to be in the field plan review comments. And important thing is this is not going to be part of your field plan review score, but there will be comments that you'll need to respond to from looking at this model. So let's look at some of the items that the reviewer will be looking for, and you should be looking for as well. We'll be checking for gaps. So these are areas where your side roads come up to your intersections. You want to make sure that they match and you don't have surface triangulating between them. Check for discontinuities between your templates. Make sure that your templates butt up against each other so that you don't have an area where you'd fall through. We really want to look at shoulder transitions. These are areas, especially where you're adding guardrail or the shoulder tapers in and out. Any other tapers you may have, this is something you'll be able to see in the model. As well as side street connections. This is an area we want your center lines to match, the edge of pavements to match. You want to make sure that you do your super elevation transitions. This is a great way to check that you're transitioning to match across the intersection. You also need to do your radius returns. We want to have continuous radius returns that are sloped properly, especially if you have curb and gutter. We want to model those shoulders, model the inside of the radius returns so you can get those limits on the inside. Let's look at the bridge connections. Here you have your roadway transitioning to an approach slab and transitioning to a bridge. There are some adjustments you need to make, and that can really give you information about where those limits will end up, which really leads into the bridge end rolls. This is an area where you have your normal roadway shoulder, you're coming down to the existing ground, and then you transition down your wing wall to meet the berm elevation that's in your bridge plan and elevation. So you want to make sure that you model that properly. It's really important for potential environmental impacts, also as well for the bridge staking layouts, because you'll want to stake out the end rolls and make sure that it's a certain distance from the railroad or from a stream. So building your bridge end rolls is an important part of any kind of bridge project. Next, we'll look at retaining wall wraparounds. When you have your shoulder coming up to retaining wall, you don't want to just have a gap there where it drops off. You really want to rotate your slope around and tie it into the retaining wall because they can't just construct a vertical slope there. So this is generally what that should look like when you start a retaining wall. Also really important are the project tie-ins. When you tie into existing ground, you want to rotate your super elevation to match. And you also want to tie in any ditches, any slopes. This really helps, especially, avoid any potential impacts with construction that you may not be expecting. So, make those transitions at the end of your project to existing ground. So we looked at what GDOT will be looking at. So now let's look a little bit about how, especially if you're a design consultant, how do you review the model? This should be part of your QC/QA process. You really want to make sure that your model and your plans are consistent and that they reflect the engineer's design intent. So there's 3 different methods we're going to look at. First is, we have a lot of experience with looking at PDFs, where you get a PDF that somebody's worked hard on, bring everything in, annotating it, and then you'll review and provide comments. But it takes a lot of time to produce that PDF. Obviously, you still have to review it because it is a deliverable, but what if you could start reviewing early and start to see some of those areas potentially in between your cross sections or things that you might not notice. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the future of model review, which is the Bentley Infrastructure Cloud iModel Viewer, which is a new product Bentley's been developing. So the first review you'll do is a visual review, very similar to the one that GDOT would do, but obviously you want to do it before you send it off. You're rotating and zooming around in the 3D model, looking for any potential issues or conflicts. So in this case, I did add the aerial image to the existing ground just so you can get some additional information. But this is a great chance to see potential errors, as you can see here, where there's a gap between the sidewalk and the shoulder slopes down. This is an area where you can find with one of these reviews and know that you need to mark that for further review. So one of the ways we traditionally look at our projects is through cross sections, typically in PDF. But you can get really good information by doing this within the native software, within OpenRoads. As you can see, you can have cross sections along the center line. And what's nice is you can see the whole model. So as you go through the intersection, you can see the whole roadway put together. And this is also a great opportunity to look for any kinds of issues. One other method you can do besides just cross sections is doing a profile along geometry. You can create a geometry line anywhere you want to in the model, just as I'm doing here, and then view the profile of it. So I'm going to click on that and view a profile and put it in the window, and then do a 3D cut. So you can see the existing ground, you can see all of the features that make it up, as well as the top surface. The important thing to look at as you're doing this review is look at your features that you get from your corridors versus your finished terrain. You want to make sure that your finished terrain is on the top of all of these features. And if you notice it's starting to dip below, that's when you need to go look at your templates and make sure that you have all the right point feature codes, all that kind of information. Make sure your surface is being created correctly. But this is a great way to check and make sure that it's doing what you intend. Next, we have contours. I know contours are sort of old school when it comes to 3D models, but it's a really great way to see things, in a 2D view, and you can really see the differences here. One of the benefits to open roads is you can see your contours in a lot of different ways. So you could reference your terrain file somewhere else and go ahead and turn off, go ahead and override the symbology, turn on, normal contour symbology, and then you can actually increase the number of contours you have. In this case, I'm setting, major to 1, minor to 0.1, and you can get so much more information about your roadway surface. Look for some of those errors, look for potential drainage issues. In this case, I'm turning on low point elevations, turning on arrows. So this is a great way to see how your surface is interacting. In this case, I'm coming back to this error area and noticing that dip in the contours. And I can go look at some of the source information. I can turn on break lines and see here that my break line is missing. That may be why we're getting that error in the surface. So there's a lot of great things you can do in this view. So one of the best things about creating models is for analyzing and reviewing drainage. There's a couple great tools in OpenRoads you can use, such as Analyze Trace Slopes in the hydraulic menu. You can go in and trace slopes on existing ground and on your proposed surface, seeing how the water will flow. This is a great opportunity to check your drainage areas, make sure they're correct. I also really like the Analyze Point tool in the terrain menu, where you can click on your terrain and get the slope, get the elevation, but also create a level contour around the surface. This is a really great chance to check, suppose flanker structures to see how far the water would spread outside of the flankers. This isn't as related to the surface, but when you create a plan set with drainage, you have the structures, you have the pipes, you have some tables, but how do you really know that things were done properly? So I really recommend getting into that drainage model, looking at profiles. This is a great chance to see, are your pipe sizes correctly sized for the amount of water in there with the hydraulic grade lines? Should you consider adjusting the profile to match crowns instead of inverts? Do you need to make other adjustments? One of my favorite tools for reviewing drainage are flex tables. You can pull up a whole list of structures and look at the gutter spread at all of them. Look for any outliers. Look at the settings that went into each of those structures. Check time of concentrations. Is there one that's way out of whack? This is a great way to be able to quickly go through and find potential issues with your drainage model before you get to the plans. So one thing I really like to do, especially with overlay, is I like to do a little more detailed analysis. I know many of you have done minimum overlay profiles before, but when you're trying to do minimum overlay on an existing roadway, you need to do a little bit more than just set that profile. So what I like to do is do a delta terrain model where I compare my finished surface with the existing surface in an area of my overlay. And that creates a new delta surface, which basically shows how low you are, how high you are. And then you can take it over and change the display in OpenRoads to do a thematic display that's based on height. In this case, I set the display between -1 and +1. So you can really see where you're doing a slight cut, where you're doing a slight fill, and that can help you figure out where you want to adjust your profile, or do you want to adjust your super elevation transitions so that you can better match the existing roadway to have a more successful minimum overlay. So finally, I'm going to talk a little about Infrastructure Cloud. This is a new software, it's completely online, that Bentley has developed to help you review 3D models. And you can do a lot of really interesting things in here. First, you can look at profiles. So in this case, you can go ahead and select your center line and get a really detailed profile view with everything labeled. You can see how your profile impacts the 3D view as well. And it's a really easy view for somebody who doesn't want to get into CAD. And also, you can do it before you have a printed plan set. You can also go and look at cross sections along the roadway In this case, you get really good active labeling as you're coming through here. You can see all of the roadway, widths, especially if you're in an area where it's changing a lot. But I think some of the power of this is really getting fast cross sections. And cross sections with all the labels, you can decide which labels you want to show. So in this case, I'm showing both slope and width. And you can see this for any location along this roadway. And that's really powerful to get that information at any place before you have to deal with, producing PDF cross sections. And you can even get super elevation information from here where you can turn on the super, see the transitions in plan view, look for potential errors. This software is also really good for getting, quantities and doing other analysis. Some of the benefits, it's that fast information I talked about. It's also under rapid development. So every week, Bentley keeps adding more and more to this software. It keeps getting better and better. And you can also do connected feedback where you notice an issue, you mark that issue, and it's assigned to one of your designers who can come in and fix it. There are some cons to this software. The licenses are very expensive still, so I don't foresee it getting like really broad usage until Bentley brings that down. There is a separate learning curve for this software, different than you would typically have with CAD. It's not as extreme, but there is still one. And it is outside our current delivery process. It takes some work to come in here and set up some of the review. And that's not something we're currently using to produce plans. And the software is still under development. It doesn't work 100% perfect, but Bentley is working on it. It's something they're investing in a lot. So next up, Sam's going to come back and talk about how do we get from where we are now to digital delivery.
Josh, move through these pretty quickly so we can make sure and have time for questions at the end. Excuse me. So I really love this graphic. I didn't make it, but it shows how we're going from analog to digital and that we're right in the middle of it. And it's a challenge and an opportunity. I think of this in the same way that we had someone on our subcommittee the other day say he's been around so long, he remembers going from a slide rule to a calculator. And then from a calculator to Excel, or from a drafting table to CAD. All right, well, now we're going from what is, and the terms change almost every week, but traditional project delivery to digital project delivery or digital delivery. All right, here's our history, just very quickly for context. I had already mentioned our timeline about the announcement of the original deliverable back in 2019 when we spoke. This is the main thing we've been talking to you all about here today is our new guidance document, which is really a package of things coming out very soon. And the nod towards the future is the rebranding of our GPTQ group from 3D modeling to digital delivery. So this was some news that we were very excited to get from the CRC. I was basically approached and asked what I thought about this. I said, I love it. What should we do? And they said, I don't know. I said, well, I don't know either, but we'll figure it out. So this is clearly a nod to broadening our efforts and the fact that we have support from the CCC now to do so. So super excited about that. All right, so how might we get there? And you may notice the language I'm using intentionally because we don't know. We'll be figuring it out as we go to a large degree. There does exist a document from Federal Highway called the BIM for Infrastructure National Strategic Roadmap, or the NSR. This document is great. It's serving as GDOT's roadmap before we come up with our own. It does clearly show that this is the trend. So even though I'm no real expert on this topic, I would bet it all that this is where we're going. There's no question in my mind. The industry is moving in this direction. It's just a matter of how quickly we can get there. And what GDOT is trying to do is take this incremental baby steps, as I like to put it, approach to it. So we're not all of a sudden flipping the switch on Bentley infrastructure and figuring that out all at once. We're going to wade into looking at a model for the first time. So what might we do in the future? Formal pilot projects. We're going to eventually have to start testing things out. And to do that, make some part of a model contractual. So I just want to stop here and zoom out a little bit if you all will forgive me. So I've been talking about digital delivery. Then I throw up this document that says BIM for infrastructure. Who's heard of BIM for infrastructure before? Okay, and who's heard of digital delivery? And what do you all think? What's the difference between the two? Okay, BIM puts it all in one ecosystem. I think that's pretty good. Yep. In my mind, they're close enough that they're, for our purposes right now, they're synonymous, but they're both bigger picture than just 3D modeling. So the BIM is building information modeling. I say the industry is moving in this direction without question, and I think it's also fair to say that we're behind both other industries and other countries in this effort. So these philosophies have been going on for decades in the vertical industry. So building information modeling is like a building, like this building. But I would encourage you to forget about that word, focus on the I. It's all about the information. Okay, and information is the models that we're going to care about in every application. So it's hard for us even to break the habit of, when we hear information, think immediate 3D representation of a roadway. It doesn't have to be 3D. 2D geometry might be the more practical thing for certain elements moving forward. And even more broadly than that, even geometry is just one type of information. What other type of information might we want to know as a DOT about our assets, other than the width of a lane or the length of a guardrail? Quality, yeah, testing, installation date, hit of a guardrail, repair date, all these things. So I'd encourage us all to think about that idea of data and information as the big picture driving force for all of this. And most of us are engineers in this room. Over the next few years, all of our jobs are going to become just a little bit of a data governance role of an asset that JDOT has. And I know I'm throwing all these words out, but let me use guardrail as an example. Right now, our job is to lay that out safely with our engineering principles. It's very soon going to be added. In addition to that, designers apply a little bit of metadata to that element. What's the pay item number? What standard do you want the contractor to start following when they construct it in the field? We'll be following our same processes, and there'll be some type of translation that passes that data to the contractor, and then that contractor adds on to it. You know what, I adjusted it for the field. It's really 5 feet over. That's the as-built model. Okay, I'm starting to ramble. Let me go on. But to put a bow on that, if we can break the connection between, don't think that a model has to be 3D or even has to be geometric. We will be taking more of these baby steps, and this is what I started to allude towards here a little bit, applying attributes to model elements for various purposes, getting our models tighter as they progress over time. And there's going to be benefits for us as designers, just like our downstream customers. And one of y'all alluded to this, which is getting quantities from our model. So imagine taking the time to get your model well set up and apply pay items to it. And then you just press a button to generate the quantities, and there's no more entering quantities manually in 2 places. It's just that single source of truth, which I hate that expression, so I can't avoid saying it. Hopefully in the future, we'll have people whose job it is specifically to focus that on this at JDOT. So we're moving in that direction, but in the meantime, we've got great volunteers working super hard, as I mentioned before, to help us as an industry move in the right direction. All of these screenshots you're hearing, and I'll really start flying, are from that National Strategic Roadmap. So before BIM, we're working in silos, even though they might be those silos of excellence, right? After BIM, this is the model there on the right side of the screen. We're mostly focused in design, and our 3D modeling group has been focused on the handoff from design to construction. This is where a lot of DOTs, but not all DOTs, are starting in this effort towards digital delivery. Well, digital delivery, or BIM for infrastructure, there's all these fancy definitions. I would paraphrase it as saying managing an asset through its life cycle, essentially. So we need to we need to think through all handoffs. And this is the challenge of our digital delivery group moving forward. Our work on 3D models won't be stopping, and it will be evolving, but we intend to broaden that effort to see what we can get from this handoff right here. Design back to operations and maintenance in the form of a digital as-built. Okay, not necessarily for everything, but for something that we find value in. Here's another representation of that same idea, that are recognizing that at every handoff in our current process, there's some type of data loss. And for us as engineers, maybe think of all the time you put into your designs that go into CAD, that you send to your PM, that go into ProjectWise. How much of that is passed off to the contractor right now? Very, very little. PDFs generated from that, a few output files that are non-contractual. There's an opportunity to hang on to that data through construction and beyond. So same concept here on a different graphic. We've been focusing on design to construction. Digital delivery focuses on all these handoffs. Let's see my notes from this one. Basically, this is going to take everybody at DOT and all of our partners and ACEC, contractors, software providers. It's going to take all four of these pillars, not just those people I mentioned, but policies, people and skills, data and standards. It's also going to take a long time. Federal Highway puts a time frame of roughly 10 years for a DOT from when they start talking about this to when they reach full bid maturity, as they call it. So we're just starting this journey. We're not going to have been figured out this year, in this term, or in 5 years. We're probably still going to be talking about it in 5 to 10 years. So, it's going to be a journey we're on together. So with that, here's our contact information, and we're happy to take any questions. Yeah, Phil. Yes.
That was.
That is correct, yes.
GDOT Workspace, you able to create custom cross section yet in the drainage and utilities module, or is it just a generic like 4:1, 2:1 flat bottom ditch cross section?
I know GDOT has a lot of them set up, but you can create your own within the software.
Okay, the last time I tried, you couldn't. That's why I was asking.
Okay.
Custom cross sections weren't, and I actually brought it up to Christy and John. This sometime last year, and I never heard an update from it. So it's good if you could create custom cross sections this year.
Yeah, you sort of have to, go and create your own prototype and go from there. But
so you can't just like drop a cross section, your regular section, and have it pull from the terrain like it can do that, or lay out your own custom point cross section.
yeah, we're limited to what GDOT set up, but there is the option for you to come back and add certain things to whether it's your file or your workspace.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, you can go ahead first. So the 3D guidelines that we have developed really define which areas need to be modeled. And, we can talk a little bit about that where, we want to model, radius returns, intersections, but we're not having people model, every little curve of islands and that kind of stuff at this point. So there were some complex areas that don't provide that benefit, but you'll have to look at the manual and the checklist to see what those areas are. Yes, Chris.
What they say is that the models that we give them are not good enough to go out there and build the project. So they would say that the level of detail that we have is not there. They would also say that, let's say you have an interchange that typically what they're seeing is between maybe the main line and the ramp. The grading's not there to what actually needs to be done in the field. And we've talked to multiple contractors that say that. So some contractors do use the model. I'm not going to just say they all don't, but the broad majority of folks, they will basically take your plan set and stitch it together in Trimble and build something themselves and really not use what we give them for the most part. Or another example is if something happens in construction, maybe something gets slightly off, and it's another example from a contractor. Where they were given a model, a perfectly modeled roundabout. Something happened in the interior apron where it got off by a little bit. As that goes down your travelway, up your curb, over your sidewalk, into your brake line, they're within tolerance. But now the model that was delivered, because the slight change in construction, it's now a little bit off. They don't want to use the model anymore, right? They just said, all right, well, now it's off. It's done. So the goal is to give them better models and push the consult the community to provide better models and formats like the DXF that they can use to, if we're giving you all these levels, back of curb, retaining wall, face, all these things, they can load that into their software. They're basically using all the components we're designing to build their stuff and not building it from scratch. That's the idea, but they do currently not use what we give them for the most part.
I'll just add on one thing to that, which is that they're not contractual. And the very first thing one of our contractors said in our group was, if you make the model contractual, we're done here. You can dissolve this group today and we're good to go. And he's saying that tongue in cheek, but the point still stands, as that is for design to construction handoff, that is the goal. But it's going to, like I said, it's going to take a long time to get there. And we don't have the philosophy of let's start trying it all. Let's start trying baby pieces of it, start flipping the order of precedent where one model element is contractual for something, but the plans are contractual for the other. And I said one more thing. Let me add two more things. It's already working. Because when we first met with the contractors and we even started looking at our own models, I mean, to say they weren't great is an understatement or whatever. I mean, you look at a roundabout and there's nothing in the middle. It's just four roads. It's like, oh my God. We're hearing a constant message from the contractor that the models are improving significantly, which is great. So they are now using them as a reference. But until the point where we say they're contractual over the plans, they're still going to, for their own liability and everything, build their own. But they're seeing progress, which is great. Say again? Are other states doing the same thing? It's the whole gamut. Yes, you have a handful of DOTs who are the leaders in this area. Some have piloted full, what they call model as a legal document projects, electronic sign or digital signing and sealing, but they're few and far between. And other states are taking, the next level behind that, which I would hope that GDOT is. If not, we're in the group behind there. So just kind of like everything, yes, some DOTs are leaders and have tried this, and the nice thing is we get to learn lessons from them. But it's just the kind of the distribution you would imagine of different DOTs across the country. Yeah. Do we have time to keep going with questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, so if you're working, so as GDOT's been rolling out new workspaces, they've had this in the background since 1012 was rolled out. We now have ORD 23. The only thing that was left was a small level mapping file, basically make sure all this looks good. But right now, if you do have ORD 23, you'd be able to do this process right now. And that workflow will speak to that. And it does work with the 1012 as well.
Some of those are deliverable because we might have to retrofit that into previous design models that we've had.
No.
Say we have a virtual pad.
Wow. So you're saying you have a project, that's currently being designed, but it's still in 1010?
Even skipping.
So we're going to roll out this documentation here in the next month or so, right? So by the end of April, I'm hoping everything gets published. We're going to have a 6 month period before this is going to be things that need to be developed, be turned in, right? GDOT's stance is on majority of the projects that, you are able to hold on your version at a certain point in development of the plans, but after a PFPR or something like that, they would expect you to bump up to the supported workspace, which at this point is already 23. So to utilize the functionality of that workflow process, you would need to have a 1012 or 10 already 23 version to actually run this workflow, which by the time this is a requirement, hoping the majority of the projects would be up to that workspace level.
I guess like my main question, from version to version, what would be bugs outside of our, what we found workarounds to actually get, start going model spaces to actually draw plans, plan style, correctly? Would be deduct points on that, or that be still be viable challenge?
But you're not being graded on any of the, like, any of your milestones, you're not being graded, right? Also, we're making this kind of easy to use for the consultant community. There are ways to do all this that are not so cleanly defined. So if you are, just kind of developed a highly personalized workspace, it's in a 1011, you don't want to update, and you can't do all this. It's going to take more work on your end to get it, but you're not going to be deducted anything. None of, again, it's a supplement. All the model review things are supplemental documents. And again, the point of kind of the push for all these deliverables in that workflow document is providing contractors better files than they are. So even if you're providing them DXF files and you're working through a workaround, that's better than what they're receiving now.
Okay, before we get to your question, I do want to let you know that it is 11:51, and so that 11:45 to 12 o'clock time was for your break and vendor time with a 12 o'clock lunch. So for those who need that break to gather luggage, you are free to go. But if you would like to stay and ask questions or listen to the responses to questions asked, you're free to do that as well, because I know I have questions. So, give a few minutes for those who are leaving and so they can hear the questions that are asked. And thank you again for attending.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be shit. Right.
When do we, but like, are the task orders or like, start seeing that additional language, and the additional items like in the scoping and procurement phase? I know there's already like a 3D deliverable task, but it's usually considered for things like roundabouts, grading.
So I could let these two say differently. My thought on this, any of this extra effort that's going into like modeling these things that we're talking about. I mean, this is, I would say from a line standpoint, I'd be putting this under cross-section development line, because as we've switched from inroads to ORD, I don't know what most people's thought is. The development of cross-sections got a little bit more streamlined. It's a little bit more like hit the button. Of course, you need to still review, do a few modifications, but your cross section now is just a representation of your model, where in the past it was cut and I can manipulate it and move it all around. You can't really do that anymore. So if you're thinking about ways of capturing this effort going forward in scoping, I would be thinking about that on the cross-section development line in various project phases. That's what I think. I don't know, do y'all agree with that?
But I guess the question is like, are they gonna, like, are the procurement group, like the SMEs, are they gonna acknowledge that additional time and effort to deliver that additional modeling effort? It's, I know sometimes we have to negotiate what they anticipate the need. And
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it. So the bigger change than what we're talking about today, I think, was the past one of delivering a 3D model at all. And it was a language tweak to the existing item. If I'm going from memory a little bit, instead of develop cross sections, the task became renamed to develop model for production of cross sections. Okay, so for these changes here, I don't see any additional line items. I see maybe additional hour on the existing line item for preparation of PFPR and FFPR submission, similar to the preparation of the package to CBA for final plans.
Can I say?
Yeah.
Let me just add maybe, and to kind of reiterate what I was saying, I think there's, when you're scoping the effort for cross-section modeling, to me, what you used to scope, maybe a per cross-section, review, like I'm looking at, I've got a project with, 300 cross sections. I'm setting hours, less of that time to modify the cross section. So a shift in your thinking of scoping that away from cross sections more towards modeling. So you're kind of just shifting your man hours and thinking behind that. And all these items we're talking about the development of all this very quick processes too. So I don't think you're going to get a lot of pushback in some of the final deliverable. I'm hoping that this process only takes like an hour or so. I think you can get Medi to get an hour. I hope. Yeah.
The same 3D requirement for FFPR is gonna, retroactively go to the V8I projects, legacy projects, and still.
No.
Correct.
Question is, so the model review, once a model is reviewed, will the responses be like, Word document that says, hey, this screenshot, or like how will the comments be placed?
I think that is still kind of being discussed. Ultimately, I think in your, your final letter, right, of comments and your milestone, you'd have everything based on your sections. And I'm thinking this will be kind of a supplemental section at the end of your letter that's just any general comments from the model review. I think that's kind of the thought right now, where those are going to be captured at.
Yeah, so I'm kind of on the same page as far as like efficiency. Kind of what is the plan kind of going forward, as obviously there is going to be a learning curve to some of this and some of the already modeling. I think most of us in the room can agree already sometimes it's not the friendliest of softwares to use. So like if I'm creating a model and we also need cross sections, where it might take me 2 seconds to flip out a section and draw in my cross section. In my model, I might have to watch 3 videos and do 12 different troubleshootings. So it's like how much effort should we put into as going forward into the models versus like, because like you said, you shift the time from the cross section to the model, but with the learning curve that we're currently going to have, that's not going to be equitable at 1 hour to 1 hour, maybe 1 hour and 3 hours.
So again, maybe I'm speaking for GDOT and that shouldn't be.
It's not if I need. You're with the.
So what you're saying is exactly what we're trying to push, right? If we don't make any of this stuff, not contractual in terms of it's, going to be model as legal document, but not something that's delivered, we wouldn't, I wouldn't expect you to do it, right? You're developing things in the lifespan of this project. This, all this new guidance, this is to push everybody to basically tackle that learning curve. We want people to start moving in that direction. I've had discussion with Frank Flanders of design policy. I mean, his thinking on that is we want to start moving in this direction of thinking about the model more so than the plans, to the point where, if we revisit the way we show model elements in the 13 series that look more like the model versus the plans, which is kind of, this is further out, but again, I think you tackled it, that we anticipate the learning curve, and that's what we're trying to push the consultants, the community to tackle that and get better at modeling. That's the whole idea here.
I think he's getting at the point that the model doesn't always show like what your intent is at the time to make it do that. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes the quirk pops up and you can't get your model to do what you want it to do, but you can make it for your plans. How do you then turn in models? As a deliverable now, it reflects back on you. How do you bring that up? How do you make that right?
We're not expecting perfection, right? So I would say that, again, if we're just trying to get better at It's something that gets brought up, a lot of which is a problem. It's.
It's 1,000 fucking questions over there. I gave him already one DNCD. Yolanda's still up there letting him ask questions. So. Oh, it's in 4C. Yeah, I had to take my laptop.
Record the session, right? It was fine. We don't have to record.
Yeah. That recording is that stuff failed. I haven't sat at one the whole time, so I'm gonna sit here. And you don't want to sit at there? I haven't done it good.
Well, I don't think.
Then you wouldn't have jobs.